Welcome. My name is Lisa Connell, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm the president of the association at Willow Run. What I'd like to do today is talk to you a little bit about, as we've been talking about from the beginning of the year, the declarations and bylaws and the updates and amendments that we are trying to make to these two documents. As you know, we've worked on it. A committee has worked on it for the past really 2 years. It came to a vote last year, and the amendments to both the declaration and bylaws narrowly were not passed by about 7 votes. And so as we've talked about in previous meetings, a lot of that had to do with owners selling their properties and their votes then being null and void because they're no longer owners, and the idea that there's some new owners that didn't have the ability to vote or didn't really know what they were voting for. So the other thing that came out of some of the meetings last year is that people were kind of confused with the information. There were a lot of different documents with some things were crossed out, some things were written in red, and it just got to be very confusing. So what we're trying to do this year is create a series of videos that will help explain the documents a little bit better, the changes that were made to the documents, and then moving forward at the end of the season and having another vote to approve those declarations and to approve the amendments and so on that were changed and the updates. So what I'd like to do now, and a reminder too, that these were written, probably started to get written in like 1981 in preparation for the development of Willow Run that opened in 1983. So as we've talked about, as we've all changed since 1983, these documents really need to be changed and updated to reflect not just, a handful of campers that are around a lake, but the idea of park models and additions and all the things that have changed within our community. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about declarations. When we started off, the declarations and bylaws were one document. So one of the things that the committee chose to do is separate out these two documents because they really are extremely different. What the declaration really does is talk about what Willow Run is. And the bylaws go into exactly how to kind of implement these ideas in the formation of the declaration, the formation of Willow Run. Really what these 10 articles we're going to talk about right now in the declaration do is kind of clarify what Willow Run is, technically where it's located, and it's interesting kind of talking about how to keep the integrity of our community and what that's going to look like. Willow Run is run from a conditional use permit. And we still want to stick with, and do have to stick with that idea that it's for camping and recreational usage, that it's not a permanent residence for any of the people that live here. And so a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in this article is to really keep the integrity of our community. So to start off in talking about the declaration now is made up of 10 different articles. And basically those articles explain kind of what Willow Run is. Now, one of the things before I really get started into it is that you'll find a couple of things that will be posted on the Willow Run website under the members tab. One is going to be the document as it exists today without any of the changes, which is having the declaration and the bylaws all together. The other two documents will be the clean document amended of the declarations, and then a clean document amended of the bylaws. So as you kind of look through things, I'll talk about what some of the differences and changes have been made. And as you see in the documents that have been amended, those things are written in red. But you will also see, if you look at the original document, some things that have been eliminated. So as we start off talking about, as I said, kind of the introduction to this document, there was a lot of verbiage in the very beginning of the original document that had to do with really the opening of the park. and some of the very original stipulations under this beginning, talking about first meetings and so on, things that really don't exist anymore. So as you look through, you'll see some of those things missing because they really don't pertain to what is happening at the park at this time. So as I said, the declarations kind of start off with an introduction, talking about it being a condominium association, and then also kind of a physical layout of what where Willow Run is, and looking at literally the longitude and latitude, kind of the area that Willow Run covers. And so that's kind of the nitty gritty of what it's talking about. And then Article 1 starts off with definitions, because as we know, if you start to read through a document like this and the definitions of some of the terminology is not clear, you'll see that this makes it clear as to what those words or phrases mean. Really not too many changes to this. One of the things that was added was the definition of a park model, because again, as we started off, there was no such thing as a park model. There were campers that were, kind of, as we see, placed along the rim of the big lake in the very beginning. And so as park models were added, additions, and so on, you'll see some of those changes in this document, talking about the ACC, and if you're making changes, going through the ACC to accomplish that, and so on. But again, just a way to update that article. Articles 2 and 3 are very similar to one another. What Article 2 does is really a set of descriptors on what a unit is and what ownership of that unit and that lot means in comparison to common elements. And then Article 3 describes really what common elements are. Really no changes were made to these two articles, in that it's just really another descriptor of what it is to own a unit, own a lot, and what the difference is between those and common elements. Article 4 talks about a little more deeply into the obligation of being an owner of a property in Willow Run. It talks about things like paying your taxes and paying your dues. It talks about the responsibility of the board and actions of the board if owners are not living up to those obligations. It has a very clear definition of easements as compared to personally owned property and the different types of easements there are. It also talks about damages, and if damage is done to something on your property, or if damage is done by an owner in the common element, or if there's damages in the common elements, and what the responsibilities are of not just the owner, but also of the board and the association. Article 5 talks in a little more depth about unit usage. And one of the things it talks about is the conditional permit that we have at Willow Run that keeps it a seasonal property. And it's kind of a reminder that the community is to be used for, as they still term it, camping and recreational usage. And so one of the differences that you'll find, and the things written in red, what it talks about here in this article and Article 6 are the covenants and restrictions. And what it does talk about the limitations that we have in our ownership at Willow Run to keep the integrity, as I said, of it being kind of a camping and recreational usage community. So what you'll see in the beginning is just in the red, kind of a definition of what this means for our community and for Willow Run. But that's really the only change in this, and in Article 6 also, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the real difference is kind of the description of what those covenants and restrictions are and why they are basically part of the declaration, and that's to keep the integrity of our park. Article 6 talks a little more about unit occupancy. And it talks about things like general management of your property and the responsibility for upkeep in a property. It talks about if you want to do improvements on your property, additions, and so on, and just what it means to take care of your unit and kind of what process you need to go through if you're going to make some major changes in your unit. What you'll find as you read through the bylaws that a lot of the bylaws do pertain to this idea of unit occupancy. And the only real change, as we said with Article 5, Article 6 has a little introduction again in explaining kind of the covenants and regulations around the occupancy of your unit. But honestly, 4 and 5 are very similar, talking about the covenants and the restrictions. Article 7 talks about something that actually people are dealing with a lot, and that's the ownership, the leasing, or the rental of your unit. Obviously, this year we've seen, some ownership changes, and we've seen with people that have some multiple units, we have some rental situations going on. What you'll see the changes in this is kind of to redefine, as we have more rentals, what those rental obligations are, not just in the paperwork that's turned in if you're going to be renting your unit, but what the obligations of the renter are, and really what the ramifications of the board is if rentals aren't living up to the bylaws and not living up to the rules and regulations that are outlined for Willow Run. So please read, if you have an opportunity, kind of those guidelines for rental, because if you're thinking about renting your unit, this will be very helpful. And again, those updates are in red that kind of lock down some descriptors and some processes of renting your unit, but also of ownership. So please read this article. Article 8 primarily deals with the scenario if there's a breach of restrictions and covenants that occur within Willow Run. It really spells out the process for owner's claims, for mediation, for arbitration. It also spells out a little more specifically than it did before concerning attorney fees, concerning progressive fines for habitual violators. So it gets a little more specific. You'll see a little more writing in red where this is concerned, and additions to it to really create some clarity when there is a major breach in people choosing deliberately to not follow the rules and regulations, the bylaws, the covenants of Willow Run as written. Okay, we're almost getting to the end. Article 9 talks about liabilities, and liabilities of the board, of committee members, of employees, of volunteers within the park. The people that are there a lot of them volunteer their time to help maintain and improve the park. And it's really as a protection for those people that are really putting their time and energy into doing what's best for our park. And lastly, Article 10 talks about some general provisions. And one of the things I think to be noted in this, that it talks about the rights of the owners if Willow Run Condominium Association would cease to continue, and what your individual rights are and responsibilities as a property owner if that occurs. The other thing it does talk about, and what we've been dealing with, is that to make an amendment to this document, there has to be 3/4 of the owners voting in favor. So again, as we move forward in creating these amendments, it does spell out these amendments and what needs to be done to get them passed. Continuing on, we also have created a feedback loop for anybody that has questions or comments concerning these videos, concerning these documents. As I said before, all of these documents, old and new, will be placed on the members site of the webpage. So if you want to look through those, please, we ask as a board, do not comment on the videos, do not comment on the documents in the Facebook page. That's social media. That's not a place for questions that you have concerning these documents. What we have done actually, though, is created a feedback loop for you. We have created an individual email address that is just designated for comments and really questions that you have on the videos or on these documents. And that email address is wrdeclaration@gmail.com. So wrdeclaration@gmail.com. Copies of this video too, and the videos to follow, will be also placed on that member site on the Willow Run page. So you can go back and look at those and listen to those if there's information that you have a question on. I want to thank everybody. I tried to keep this as concise and short as I could. Again, you can always come to a board member if you have any other questions. Right now, what we're looking at moving forward and at the end of the season to take a vote on number 1, separating out the declarations from the bylaws, and number 2, approving the amendments that are being made for both, so we could move on at Willow Run and update our obligations in creating a safe and orderly and up-to-date set of documents as we can. So thank you very much. Take care.